Welcome back, Focus Learners, to another deep dive on The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of history's absolute most fascinating and enduring cryptozoological mysteries. We're heading straight into the remote, unforgiving heights of Central Asia to track down a creature that has literally haunted the edges of human civilization for centuries. We're talking, of course, about the Almas. Now, you might be wondering, is it a surviving pocket of Neanderthals, a misidentified bear, or, something entirely different? In this explainer, we're going to look closely at the historical records, the hard genetic data, and the folklore itself to firmly separate the myth from the reality. Okay, let's dive into this like a detective's case file. First up, we'll establish the legend of the Almas, then review the historical evidence. Next, we'll look at the scientific verdict, trace the evolution of a myth, and finally uncover the truth behind the legend. Part 1. The Legend of the Almas, Central Asia's Mountain Wild Man. To really wrap your head around this cryptid, you have to picture the environment first. We're talking about the remote, freezing peaks of the Mongolian Altai and the Caucasus. These are vast, sparsely populated, and just incredibly harsh terrains. So out in these deep forests, what exactly are people claiming to see? Well, across multiple languages and traditions, the Almas is consistently described as a hair-covered, bipedal humanoid, usually standing about 5 to 6.5 feet tall. Witnesses report reddish-brown to black hair across most of the body, a prominent brow ridge, a flat nose, and a weak chin. They're said to be nocturnal, incredibly shy, and, this is key, entirely lacking the ability to speak, make fire, or use complex tools. They basically occupy this very specific liminal space. They walk upright like us, but they live completely wild like animals. And this brilliantly illustrates how the Almas is actually part of a massive worldwide wild man archetype. It's really common for people to just casually call the Almas Mongolia's Bigfoot, but when you compare them directly, they're quite distinct. While the Yeti of the Himalayas is described as highly ape-like with whiter gray fur, and the North American Sasquatch is this massive, foul-smelling giant, the Almas is smaller, distinctly humanoid, and completely lacks speech. In fact, its closest relative in the folklore world isn't Bigfoot at all. It's actually the medieval European woodwose, that classic wild man archetype representing a hairy, naked human living out in the forest. Part 2. The historical evidence, hunting the cryptid. So, if this is just a widespread wild man archetype, what convinced so many serious explorers and scientists that it was a real biological creature? Well, the hunt for the Almas stretches back way further than you might think. The earliest Western record actually comes from 1427, when a Bavarian captive named Johannes Schultzberger recorded tales of fur-covered savages in the Tian Shan Mountains. Centuries later, the modern hunt arguably kicked off with a really widely cited 1906 desert sighting by researcher Bazar Bardian. By the 1960s, things got incredibly serious. A Mongolian investigator named Zhugdarian Damdin documented extensive eyewitness accounts and even reported finding an unknown hominid's skull, though tragically it was lost in transit to Poland. Fast forward to 1992, and Dr. Marie-Jeanne Kaufmann leads this massive international scientific expedition into the Caucasus Mountains, gathering over 500 eyewitness accounts and collecting actual physical hair samples. The search was just relentless, driven by the tantalizing promise of physical proof. But the whole narrative radically shifted during the Cold War. In 1963, a Soviet historian named Boris Porshnev published The Soviet Sasquatch. He claimed to have compiled a staggering 1.3 million indications of these creatures. Porshnev fundamentally changed the game here. He argued that the Almas wasn't a monster, and it wasn't a spirit. He claimed it was a surviving, relict population of Neanderthals. This one hypothesis took a local folktale and turned it into a tantalizing scientific quest that absolutely captivated researchers for decades. Part 3. The scientific verdict, putting the legend under a microscope. Okay, so with lost skulls, centuries of sightings, and this massive Soviet hypothesis, what happens when modern genetics actually tests these legendary claims? Let's look at the most famous piece of supposed evidence, Zana of Abkhazia. In the 19th century, a remarkably strong, nonverbal, hairy woman named Zana was captured in the Caucasus. Cryptozoologists, including Porshnev, pointed to her for years as living proof of a surviving Neanderthal or an Almasti. But the definitive 2021 genomic reality, published by Ashat Margarian and his team, painted a very, very different picture. After sequencing DNA from her remains, the cold, hard genetic facts were clear. Zana was a fully modern human woman.
Her actual genetic heritage was entirely human, showing roughly 66% East African and 34% West African roots. She possessed absolutely no Neanderthal admixture beyond completely normal human levels. The tragic, entirely real history here is that she was likely an enslaved woman brought to the Caucasus via the Ottoman slave trade. Her unique physical characteristics, which were possibly a condition like congenital generalized hypertrichosis, combined with an intellectual disability, basically caused the locals to map their existing wildman folklore right onto her. A genuine human tragedy was unfortunately transformed into a sensational cryptid legend.
But wait, what about the physical hair samples collected by all those explorers over the years? Well, in 2014, Brian Sykes and a team of geneticists analyzed 30 different hair samples attributed to anomalous primates like the Almas. The DNA results were completely definitive. The samples matched the Eurasian brown bear, the American black bear, domestic horse, domestic cattle, and ordinary humans. Out of 30 samples, exactly 0 belonged to an unknown hominid. And that brings us to this incredibly important number, 0. There are exactly 0 fossils of an unknown Holocene hominid in Central Asia. There are 0 verified physical remains. And despite decades of dedicated expeditions and the widespread everyday availability of cameras, there are 0 clear, unambiguous photographs. The biological investigation of the Almas, at least according to the current scholarly consensus, is completely closed. Part 4. Evolution of a myth. If science says no, why does it survive? So the crucial point is, if science resoundingly says no, and literally every piece of physical evidence points to known animals, like bears rearing up on their hind legs, or to modern humans with medical conditions, how has this legend persisted across multiple countries, languages, and centuries? Well, it's because the Almas isn't a failure of zoology, it is a massive, incredibly functional success of sociology. Let's look at how this myth actually functions in the day-to-day world of Central Asian pastoralists. Step 1. The Almas acts as a boundary guardian. Remember, these are incredibly harsh, unforgiving environments. Having a legendary, terrifying creature inhabit the deep forests or mountain passes effectively marks the limits of safe, civilized territory. Step 2. It serves as a moral cautionary figure. It's a boogeyman that keeps curious children from wandering off into the freezing, deadly wilderness. And step 3, the myth constantly renews itself by absorbing misidentified fauna. When a herder sees a brown bear standing on its hind legs in poor visibility, the cultural template of the Almas is already right there in their mind, ready to categorize that terrifying silhouette. It's basically a cultural tool for survival. Anthropologists Stolberg and Swalmberg note a really fascinating detail about these wildman figures. Quote, "Despite their physical similarity to humans, they do not have any language," end quote. This is a universal trait of the Almas. By inventing a creature that looks like us and walks like us but cannot speak or make fire, ancient cultures essentially created a cognitive mirror. The Almas exists to help humans define exactly what it means to be human. Speech, culture, and community. These are the things the Almas lacks, and they are exactly the things that keep us alive out in the cold. Part 5. The truth behind the legend. The human need for monsters. So we've seen that the evidence for a biological hominid is completely non-existent. But you know what? That doesn't mean the Almas isn't real. It just means it's an entirely real, powerful, psychological phenomenon instead of a biological one. I want to leave you with this final thought. Are legendary monsters like the Almas simply mirrors we invent to make sense of the untamed wilderness surrounding us? Because when we stare into the dark, remote corners of the world, our minds naturally populate them with creatures that reflect our own deepest fears and boundaries. The Almas may not be walking the Altai Mountains in flesh and bone, but as a guardian of the unknown, it will likely live on in the human imagination forever. Thank you so much for joining me on this investigation. Keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.